this episode of Rods and Roots, we drive 600 miles from Boise, Idaho to Reedsport, Oregon to fix a broken timing belt on a 2010 Forester. Way of fixing a broken timing belt. These are an interference engine, so it's one of those things where heads and valves are going to be probably damaged, and we need to get to the root cause of what caused the timing belt to break. The timing belt only has 8,000 miles on it, so it's one of those things where, was it a bad timing belt, or was it something more catastrophic? So we're going to dive right into this, and I'll show you what's been going on. So let's see what this looks like. As you can see, I took the driver's side timing cover off already, and this is what we have. If you look, it looks like it broke pretty clean through. It's not a typical break. If you look, normally the timing belt would be more frayed like fingers versus a straight across type of break. So it seems to have something internal that came to a dead stop. So we'll see what's going on with that. Engine looks like it's in pretty good condition. It's only got 8,000 miles on the complete engine, which really kind of baffles me, but we'll figure it out. Alright, the first thing we're going to get to is we're going to start getting this engine stripped down, get ready to get pulled so we can figure out what's catastrophically wrong with this engine, and then get it repaired and get it on an engine stand. See what came apart. Let's get started. This belt cover out of the way. I have my dad helping me today. He's you'll see him popping in and out. That's Gary. I'm Dan. Get some of these accoutrements out of the way. I always like to put all my fasteners back in the parts that they came off of. The good thing about Subarus is they come with their own parts trays. You just throw them right up there. We need to bring that table closer, I guess. So we're going to get this air box out, disconnect our intake system. This out of the way. Being a little cold outside, everything's going to be a little bit stiff. I always like to just put the parts on the roof. Get those out of the way so we're not tripping over them. Never disconnect any kind of sensors or anything while the battery's connected. So what we're going to do first is we're going to pull this battery terminals off and get this battery out of the way. And on fuel injected engines, you always want to pull the negative first. Disconnect the negative and then the positive. And then we can get this battery out of the way. With the battery out, we can get our sensors disconnected. They make a tool for these connectors, which is really cool, and when I find them I'll put them on there so you guys can see what I'm talking about. They're made by Lyle. So we have our mass air meter disconnected, and we're going to go ahead and pull this air box. There's a nut right here that comes off, which is a kind of a pain because you always drop it down in the fender well. I wish they would have put it more accessible. But luckily you can get it out once you get the air box out, so it's not something that's lost forever. And there's one bolt down here. Pull that out. Put it up in your parts tray. Your power steering lines are connected to your air box, so to make sure you don't break your clips off. I put my hardware back in the box, and then we'll put this up here. So basically what we're trying to do is just trying to get everything off the top of the engine. Get that out of the way first before we lift it up and do underneath. Get you in here a little bit closer so you can see what I'm doing. So we're going to continue to disconnect electrical connections. This will be your upper air box. You want to make sure you get your PCV lines off of it. There's two of them, one on each side. And we're going to pull the upper air box off. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect main power harness from the engine to the vehicle, which is right back here. You can see it right here. Push down on these. Everybody pries up on them and they break them. So I'll get you in here so you can see what I'm talking about. So these are locked. People pull up on these. This little tab right here, and then this locks it in, and they break these. And you'll always see one that has a zip tie around here. It's because people don't push down on them to unlock them and then push them forward. And we'll take our harness clip loose and pull our harness off. Slide it out to the back. Again, put your harness, your hardware back in the holes that they come out of so you know where they're at. We'll need a small screwdriver. Underneath these clips, there is a clip that holds it to the actual transmission. You gotta just kind of pry under it and slide it off. It slides off like that. So you don't break that off, because when we go to pull the intake off, we gotta make sure that that's disconnected. We're going to move on to the front accessories. Get these front accessories taken off. See if I can get you in here a little bit closer, see what I'm doing. We're going to take the power steering pump off, the alternator and the AC, and we're going to disconnect these systems without opening the system, so we don't have to worry about any leaking or any of that stuff. Subaru made this very easy, so once we get all this stuff out of the way, we don't have to drain the AC system or the power steering system in order to rebleed them or to recharge the system or nothing like that. Everything just moves out of the way. A lot of this is just all quick disconnect, so we're not worried about a lot of that stuff. Like I said, we're going to be doing quite a few different types of vehicles on this channel. We got a 70 Ford truck, we got a 68 Chevy truck, we got different types of imports. We're going to have, there's a 59 Volvo here that we might work on the channel. There's a 57 Ford truck on the channel that might get worked on and here and there. Definitely Subarus and quite a few hot rod trucks. We're going to do a lot of LS swaps, 84 Corvette, 59 Apache. I do a lot of hot rod trucks, so that's if you're into the truck stuff and fabrication and welding and learning how to do long bed to short bed conversions, we'll be doing a lot of that type of stuff. R&R Garage does all that stuff, and you'll see how to do it correctly. Right now we're just trying to get the alternator disconnected, and Subaru puts a provision on here because they are a tight fit that does have a screwdriver wiggle spot to get these up. They do break, so you got to be careful. They're brittle, especially on the older vehicles that are over 10 years old. So disconnect the connectors. We'll pull this harness out of the way, disconnect our signal wire to our AC compressor, and then pull the harness out and put it over where the battery box is. And get this up out of the way. Always close this because these always break if you leave them open. So just close them and lock them. They're very, very brittle. That's the cover for the alternator wire. I can't count the number of times I've had to replace those because they've been left open. So you can pretty much take a Subaru apart with 3 tools. A 10 mil, a 12 mil, and a 14 mil, and every once in a while you'll need a 17 mil. I think there is one thing on here we'll need. It's a 22 mil, which is the crank bolt and the EGR. So other than that, those 3 sizes are your main ones. So shout out to Milwaukee Tools. They're an awesome tool. It's the only tools that I like to use. They have a great warranty on their batteries and their tools. They're 5 years. It's great. So we're going to be removing the alternator. Get up here. Now that that's disconnected, we'll put this up in our tool tray, our parts tray, and get our alternator out of the way. You'll see when we go to put it back on, they're not very fun. They do make a special tool for reinstalling these stretch belts, but I'll show you how to do it without it, and show you how to do it without damaging the belt grooves themselves. So we'll go ahead and get this power steering pump out of the way, which is the fun part because it's in the worst accessible spot on a lot of these. You got to do it kind of by feel. Just throw that anywhere. Underneath the power steering pump, there's 2 bolts. One thing you got to remember when you're working on these Subaru engines is everything's aluminum. So where are you at? With everything being aluminum, everything needs to be torqued. Everything on this engine has a torque value because it's going into an aluminum fitting. And a lot of people, when I work on these Subarus, the power steering bolts and a couple of other fittings on the engine like water pump and oil pump, they over torque them and strip the block out. So they either have to be oversized or helicoiled, which is not very fun, and I don't suggest doing that on these engines. Just like that, we got one more connection on here to pull, which is your signal wire for your power steering. That gets disconnected, and this whole unit stays complete without having to open the system. And you're just going to put it over here where your airbox is and get it out of the way. That way you're not having to rebleed the system. Next, we'll be taking out the AC compressor. Once we get the AC compressor out of the way, we'll start disconnecting our O2 sensors, our oil pressure sensor, crank position sensor, our AVLS, our cam actuator valves, and then cam sensors, fuel, vacuum, and anything else on the engine, which I'll show you those here in a minute. Okay. So we're going to disconnect fuel at this moment. If you look at right here, all right, if you look on here, there's going to be hash marks on here. There's 2 hash marks, all right. There's a special tool that we need to use here, but at this moment, I'm going to show you how this can be disconnected with using just a zip tie. So what you do is you take a zip tie and you cut it in half, just like that. Right? As long as you make sure that these 2 lines on this plastic lock is faced up, you push it in like this. You take your zip tie and you slide it at your, I guess it would be your 3 o'clock if you're looking at it from your position, and you put one at your 9 o'clock on this position, right? And you push them all the way in, hold on to them, and then just go. There you go. Fuel line's off. So what I like to do is I like to disconnect it from here, right? And then I'll loop it back around and I'll lock this into that spot. Gets it out of my way. Okay? So we'll take some pliers here. This is your evap system. You just want to pull this clamp back to about there and then pull your evap and slide that up under here. Get that out of the way. You get your 45-degree pliers, and this is where a lot of these come into. So you're going to pull your PCB, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to undo it from here. You're going to slide it off your intake, and you're just going to tuck it up out of the way for now so you don't pull on it when you pull the engine out. One thing you need to do on all the fasteners on these aluminum engines is you need to break torque on them by hand. Don't use an impact. because you'll pull the threads right out of them. I enlisted my dad into being the cameraman for the day. So once we break torque on these, we can get this AC compressor out of the way. Once we break the torque, get those out of the way. Now that we have the torque broke, we can actually use our power tools to make it a little faster to get these out. Again, just remember that they are aluminum, and you don't want to sit there and spin them so fast that it creates heat on the threads, because then you weaken the threads. And you'll actually see thread material in the grooves of the bolt. So when you see that, you can see that somebody else has already been there, and of course zip ties already get you. You're going to get you every time. One more bolt up front here, and the AC compressor could come out. I'll take that. Now that the AC is loose, we can pull this belt off, because these are a stretch to fit belt. Now that the AC is out of the way, you're going to do the same thing you did with your power steering pump. With your AC pump, you're just going to put it over where your battery was and get it out of the way, like this. That way you're not breaking into your AC system. You don't have to evac it and then recover it and recharge it. So with our fuel disconnected, our vacuum lines disconnected, we're going to go ahead and disconnect our sensor wires. We're going to disconnect our EGR, and we're going to go ahead and pull this intake. First thing that we'll disconnect will be our oil pressure, our crank position, our oil pressure, and our crank position will be the first ones we disconnect. We'll go ahead and disconnect our front O2 and rear O2. Which there's a button back here, if you can get to it, that slides back. So there's a button right behind here, where my finger is, back here, that you'll slide this back like that, and then you'll pull this forward, and then you can disconnect this right here. It is a pain in the butt to disconnect it if you don't do it this way. It gets some dirt in there, and they're quite difficult to get apart. And then once you get it apart, you can slide it back on there. I leave them off because when we go to lift the intake, this bracket stays with the engine. So where'd my screwdriver go? Same thing with a lot of these Subaru stuff. There's a hidden lock underneath. If I get this out, there's a little hidden lock under here that you're going to pull down. I use these little tiny pocket screwdrivers. And that just slides off. If you look, there's a little lock right there that you have to get out. Now that this is off, this bracket stays with the engine. The intake can come off. So what we're going to do next is we're going to do our ABCS solenoids, our AVLS for these, and then crank position. Here's your other AVLS. We already did this. Our coolant temp sensor. We'll get our throttle body out of the way, our EGR tube, and our spark plug wires have to come off. Just the spark plug side. But other than that, everything else can stay as one single unit, and I'll show you that here shortly once I get everything out of the way. So we don't have to break into the cooling system right away. What I like to do is I like to disconnect the throttle body and just kind of lay it back. That way we can remove our intake without draining our coolant system right away, because we have to jack the car up for that. So I've already got our EGR disconnected. I've already got all our AVLS, our pressure sensors, sensors, cam sensors, crank sensors, oil pressure. We'll do knock sensor once we get the intake lifted up and get this throttle body out of the way. The good thing about Subarus is that everything's modular, so when we pull the intake, the whole wiring harness stays with the intake. That way we're not having to reinvent the wheel. Like I said before, everything goes into aluminum, so we're going to break torque on our intake bolts. Okay, there's 8 of them. Later on in this channel, we're going to do an engine and transmission replacement on an 06 STI. We're going to do turbos and injectors and brand new short block and heads, and we're going to do a new clutch and get the 6-speed rebuilt, and you'll be able to see that here shortly in one of the next few episodes. I'm kind of excited because that's my baby. I've been doing Subarus for about 6 years now, and I really support the Subaru world. Obviously, put that where you don't hit your head on it. Again, we're going to move our AC back out of the way. I needed to move it so I could pull those spark plug wires. What we're going to do next is, so we don't damage intake gaskets, we're going to pull all of our intake bolts out. A lot of these Subaru gaskets can be reused as long as you don't damage them, and make sure when you're doing this stuff. I'm ex-military, so I'm aviation. I was a helicopter mechanic. I did turbine engines for all the aircraft in the Army. So it was one of those things where we were taught to disassemble, clean, inspect, replace, or repair, and then reinstall. At this time, our intake should be ready to lift. There is a knock sensor underneath here that we can't particularly get to until after we get it up. So what we're going to do is we're just going to lift the front of it up just a little bit and then slide it forward out of the EGR tube. Now that our throttle body is disconnected and just laid to the rear, now that we slid this forward, we can actually get to our knock sensor and disconnect that. That was our last connection. This intake should just come right out now that all the connections have been severed. I like to take my spark plug wires and I just kind of tuck them up here so they're not in the way. Same thing with any of our wiring. The key here is not to break anything, including connectors. Connectors on these are very brittle and they can be damaged very easily. So now that our intake is all disconnected and out of the way, take that. 100% module. We're not working on the intake today because there's nothing wrong with it, so we're going to set this off to the side. So this is what you get once you get your intake out of the way. As you can see, our gaskets are right here, and they're in pretty good shape. They're not all damaged, but we do have new ones, so we're going to replace them if we need to. I like to get these out of the way just in case we do need to reuse them, that we don't damage them. Get these and just put these over there. Passenger side, driver side. And then, as you can tell, we got our PCV tree, our throttle body does not have to be disconnected right away because this does have coolant in it on both your intake and return on your coolant. Here's your EGR tube. Your heater hoses have to be disconnected. Starter has to be removed, and then we'll start pulling bell housing bolts. O2 sensor wires that we disconnected, they go right here. Okay, our mass airflow, get that out of the way, don't break that connector. And then once we get everything on top, we got to remove our dog bone bolt, if I can talk today. Let me get this out of the way. We have our backbone, dog bone. Remove this bolt, lift this out of this. That way when we go to lift this, this transmission can come up without having to worry about this being in the way. And then, like I said, we'll remove our starter and our grounds. And then once that happens, I'll get all this out of the way, and we'll come back and then we'll start to lift this car up, and then we'll get the coolant out of it. We'll get the radiator out of it, disconnect all of our coolant lines, and the engine's ready to come out. See you in a bit. One thing you need to do, this is an automatic, as you can see right here, there's no clutch master right there, so this is an automatic. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this little door, right, and behind that is your torque converter bolts. There's 4 of them. You have to disconnect those 4 torque converter bolts before you pull this engine out. One thing I absolutely cannot stand is people that leave tools on their car. To set them there for a few seconds, fine, but to have tools laying around your whole project, you risk dropping stuff in engines, you risk damaging a radiator. I've had it happen where I had a screwdriver laying on top of the radiator one time. I fired the engine up, the screwdriver fell off, went in the fan, and shot the screwdriver right through a brand new radiator. Not good. Go ahead and pull these torque converter bolts. You gotta be careful when you pull these torque converter bolts. If you don't catch them right away, they will fall down inside there, and you'll have to fish them out later. But you got to rotate the engine around, and when you do that and you have a bolt stuck down in there, you might damage the casting on the block or a rear main seal or something like that, because these bolts tend to fall down inside there, so you don't want to damage nothing when you do that. If you do drop one, you can get a magnet down there and try and fish it back out. I would recommend doing that versus trying to rotate the engine over with these stuck down in between the flex plate and the torque converter. I've got a long ratchet here with a 22 mil. We're going to bring you in here a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Right down in here you have your harmonic balancer. There's going to be a harmonic balancer bolt. That's where you're going to rotate. I'm going to try and do this with one hand. You got your balancer You got your 22 mil on your extension. And then if you look in this window right here, we're going to rotate the engine over till we get to the next bolt. And you're going to do that to all 4 of them. I can already tell by just the compression alone turning this engine over that we got some bent valves. So later on in this video we're gonna repair all this, and we're gonna try and do this for less than $1,000, and I'll show you how we can do it. It's very simple. Let's just hope there's no damage to the top of the pistons or piston skirts, and we can inspect those once we get the engine out. Now that we got the backbone disconnected, our air box bracket off, we can go ahead and pull the starter back. Now that we have our torque converter bolts out, we can go ahead and start removing all the bell housing bolts on the top, and then we'll go up underneath and we'll get the bottom bell housing bolts, and then we'll get both motor mounts, exhaust manifold, and then lower radiator hose, and we'll get this drained. All right, let me show you what we got accomplished right now. So this is what we got accomplished in that time. So we pulled our starter out. If you can look, we just set it back there, get it up out of the way, because we have to get to the bell housing bolts and the starter is in the way. All right, we're going to go ahead and leave our throttle body connected. Leave our throttle body connected. Just leave it on top of the engine like this. All our bell housing bolts are out on this side. All of them out except for one on the bottom on both sides, because you got to get those from the bottom. We're going to leave our heater hose connected till dead last, because you don't want your heater coolant hoses dripping on you while you're underneath the car. Same thing with our radiator hoses. We'll do those last. And we got to loop out our transmission cooling lines, because we don't want those dripping all over us while we're down there. Also, you do have to remove those hoses from the radiator, so when you pull the radiator out, you don't have the coolant and the transmission lines leaking on you while you're doing that. So we'll loop those so they don't drip on you. When it comes to Subarus, and I'm not talking about these lowered ones like WRXs, STIs, XTs, GTs, any of those that are lowered to the ground, okay? If they're stock height or mild drop or Foresters or lifteds or whatever, don't use the rockers as a jack point. You destroy the pinch welds, you destroy the rockers, the K members underneath, the engine cradles. Those are all susceptible to the weight of the vehicle, and they crush. There's certain areas on these cars that are designed to be picked up. If you're going to lift it up by your pinch welds, then you have to have a pinch weld jack or an adapter that goes around the pinch weld and lifts the vehicles up from either rocker points, or where I'm going to show you where I like to do it, regardless of their lower dropped. As long as people don't remove them, there is a factory skid pan under here that protects the rack and pinion, and it is strong enough to lift the vehicle without crushing, and we'll go through that here shortly. But when we get under there, I'll show you the K members of the engine cradles and the pinch welds where they get damaged the most, and it destroys them. So I highly suggest that you don't use the pinch welds or the rockers unless you absolutely have to. And these really lowered ones, a lot of the people that own these take that skid pan off because they want that extra inch of clearance between the bottom of the car and the ground. So they take that off. So if at all possible, don't remove them. But I understand the people that like the stance or the really low Subarus that they do remove them because they want the ground clearance. But with that being said, there are jack points on here that are stronger, especially where your A-arms are connected, are a lot stronger than the rest of the body. These things are like aluminum cans, so they will crush under the weight of the vehicle. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this thing lifted up now, and we'll go over those areas that I just mentioned. All right, so now that I got the vehicle up, it's jacked up, it's on jack stands now. You only need one set of jack stands. You don't need to get the whole vehicle up off the ground, because it'll also help when we go to pull the engine out, that it gives us hood clearance for the cherry picker. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you the different things that we just spoke about, as far as like where to jack the vehicle up and where not to. So, all right. This is where Subaru has their jack points on this pinch weld right here. Their jacks are designed to go around this pinch weld and lift it up through here. A regular floor jack or any of that type of stuff will crush all this. It'll crush your rockers, and it'll crush your pinch weld. Okay? This is also an area not to jack them up from. Okay? This will all crush right here. The weight of the vehicle will crush this. You can lift them up from these areas. This is your frame area. But I always use a block of wood, because you want to spread the weight of the vehicle across the whole thing, because you will bend the floor if these do start to flex. Okay? I always put my jack stands. If you look, that's where the transmission cross member is welded to it. So I put my jack stands at the strongest point of this frame, where these jack stands right here can support the weight of the vehicle without crushing the frame rails. Okay? Those areas that I was telling you that were strong enough are these. These are strong enough to lift up the vehicle, because you have 3 points, and this area right here can lift the vehicle up without bending these areas. Okay? That's the skid pan right there that I use right here to lift these vehicles up, because you don't crush them, and they are strong enough to lift the vehicle. But a lot of them, like I said, like to remove these for more ground clearance. The WRXs and STIs are more pronounced. They actually come down off of this, come around and up forward, and so they hang down lower. But on the Foresters, they raise them up pretty well. And if you ever do damage this, this is unboltable. You can remove all the bolts and just throw it away, put another one on there from the junkyard, and you won't have any issues, and you're not damaging the vehicle. But since we're under here, we're gonna go ahead and show you that the starter's been removed, and we have a couple of bolts and nuts that we have to replace or remove from underneath here in order to get the engine out. There's the exhaust manifold we have to drop, and the motor mount nut that's buried up under there. And we'll go ahead and get this engine out shortly, find out what's wrong with it. All of our bell housing bolts have been removed except for the nut at the bottom. That's what we got to get from underneath. Same thing on the other side. Again, we're not disconnecting the heater hoses to last. We're not pulling the upper radiator hose to last, the radiator to last, and the transmission cooler lines, because if we do those first while you're under there, it'll drip on you the whole time. So we'll put a pan under it to collect anything that drips, and then I'll show you that we'll turn that lower radiator hose up, and then we'll drain the engine once it's out, because it's easier to do out of the car. Now that we're up underneath here, we're going to go ahead and disconnect our motor mounts. And then what I like to do is I just take some electrical tape and I wrap my swivel. This is a 14 mil to stop it from flopping around. That way I can get up in here, right here, and get these out. Once those are loose, we can use our electric or air or whatever you have at your disposal. It's amazing, this Forester is as clean as it is. It's got 160,000 miles on it, and it's didn't leak that much. For even the transmission, if you look, it doesn't have any signs of leaking or anything. I mean, the rack and pinion and everything looks really good. The people that own this before I did took pretty good care of it. We're gonna drop this this one splash guard on this side, so we have a little bit more room and you can see what's going on. You don't need to drop all these splash guards if you don't want to. Just makes things a little easier. What we're dropping next is our grounds. We have to disconnect the ground. Gotta disconnect remove all 6 exhaust nuts. Then we'll go ahead and remove and drain the radiator, disconnect our fans on both sides, and then these are our transmission cooler lines. Those have to be looped so we don't drip those all over the floor. So I'll go ahead and get those done, and then I'll be right back. An untouched car because they didn't mix up the hose clamps. Yeah, they're 2 different size hose clamps. Yeah, and what they do is a lot of Subaru mechanic owners, they'll mix up these clamps and they'll be so tight that they squeeze together that they won't slide onto the necks. And people will force it on with a screwdriver, and you try and get them off, and you can't because you can't squeeze them tight enough to get them off. So you know that they're the wrong clamps when they're squeezed all the way and they won't slide on. That means they go on the water neck side, not the yeah. So. People get lazy. Okay, when you pull this off, you always want to do that. And then you put it down here and bring that out. So the upper radiator hose is done. And then what I like to do is I like to pull this tube out. Alright. Pull this tube out, and then I put the tube in the upper radiator hose, in the upper radiator, so it drips into there. These are quick disconnects, so these will come out. So you don't spill that everywhere. You gotta set this somewhere. So we'll remove our radiator. We've already disconnected our fans, we disconnected our upper and lower radiator hoses, and our transmission cooling lines. We're just going to lean it forward, and then we're going to pick up the passenger side and let it drain into our bucket. Got that out of the way. And this is what we have. So, radiators out of the way. Our O2 sensor connectors are disconnected. We need to take them out of this bracket next. They stay with the manifold, but this bracket side right here stays with the engine. Same thing with this upper one. So for some reason this belt won't come out, so we got to find out what the failure was inside the timing cover. We could do that here shortly. And then the engine's ready to pull once this thing stops draining, because we got to pull heads and fix valves and see what damage we have in the heads and what damage we have on the piston side. Let's just hope everything goes well inside and everything's repairable. We'll inspect it very well here shortly, and let's see what we got. I'll be back in a minute. Alrighty then. So what I've done is I've drained the coolant. What I like to do is I like to loosen this bottom clamp, and I like to face this up just until I get the engine out, so I can drain it more easily on the engine stand and it's not leaking all over your floor. Just remember, you have, if you look right here, there is a ground wire that you have to disconnect from each head, one on each side. See it right there? Just make sure you disconnect those. A lot of people don't do it, and when you go to pull the engine out, somebody's already ripped them out. So again, this is still connected. We don't need to mess with that at all. All of our stuff back there is disconnected. Bell housing. This engine's ready to pull out right now. Our last connection we have to do is our two heater hoses. So what we'll do is we'll kick our pan back here like this, right about there, and we'll get our pliers, and what we'll do is we'll disconnect these two heater lines right here, slide these back here, slide these back there. I don't know why these work the best for this, but these work the best without damaging the hoses. But they fit around this part of the hose very well. Right? It gets all the way around them because they like to stick to the tube right here. So what I like to do is I like to just wiggle them back and forth until they break loose. So you see the hose move all the way from front to back. Do that on both of them. Get this out of the way. You don't want to move them too much or they'll rip the hoses. So just wiggle them back and forth until they start to move like that. See? That way you break them free from the tube. They like to stick. And that way you can push these off by hand now, and you'll hear it'll start to leak, and they leak. So what you do is you take these hoses, see this metal tube for your AC, just kind of tuck them right there so they don't leak everywhere. All right, do that on both of your tubes. Heater hoses, just kind of get these out of the way like that. Again, that's what the bucket's for. I've done this a million times, so I know about where to put them. Put those right about there. That way they don't leak on you. Wait for your heater hoses to stop, your heater lines to stop leaking. And we'll hook up our chain. All right, so I got the lifting chains in, and on the NA stuff, not the turbo stuff, but the NA stuff, I like to put it in the second hole on the passenger side, and the front hole of the two centers of your intake of this side on the passenger side rear hole middle, driver side front hole middle. That will give you your straight across for your chains. Another thing we have to do is we have to support the transmission when we go to lift this. We don't want it to slam back down on the cross member. So what we do is we take a jack and we put a small piece of wood on it, like so we can distribute the weight of the transmission and not crush the pan. Where's that other piece you had, Dad? The longer one? That one? We'll go ahead and get this out of the way for now. This one. So we'll put about a 12-inch piece on here. Go ahead and lower this down. Get this in there. The cherry picker will work around all this. So what I like to do is I get this right across the oil pan, the transmission pan, and on standards, I just use the center of the case. So, and you do not want to crush these oil pans. So what you want to use is you want to utilize the corners right here on the pan and the sides all the way across. You want to make sure it expands it, because if you don't, you will crush the pan with the weight. And the way that I have it set up now is when I go to lift the engine, I can also jack the transmission up to keep the same amount of tension on it. That way when we lift the engine out and it separates, the transmission doesn't slam back onto the cross member. So let's go ahead and get this engine out. Go ahead and get you guys in here so you can see what I'm doing. So I have my hook and my chain. There's a split line on the engine here. That's where you want your balance point for your hook, is the split line of the center of the engine. Just see the center of my hook and the split line of the engine right there. They're lined up, so the engine will be balanced. Let's go ahead and pull this out. So we're going to go ahead and put some tension on it. Go ahead and get the engine and the transmission to come up together until you get the studs of the engine mounts to come out of the cross member. Once the studs come out, you look underneath and you can see the gap between the bottom of your engine mounts and the stud sticking out and the cross member. So now that I got the engine above the cross member, I'm going to slowly jack up my transmission until it puts just a little bit of pressure on the bell housing. That way, when I go to separate the split line, which I just shake, see, the engine will start to, I'll get you in here. So what we do is we separate the bell housing, get it off the alignment pins. And a lot of the other Subarus, the older stuff, The alignment pins tend to stick either in the bell housing or the engine. They're supposed to be in the engine side. They're supposed to stay with the engine, not on the transmission side. But a lot of times they'll stick in the transmission side and you got to get a slide hammer and pull those out, or you can knock them all the way through. But this engine's been out recently, so they haven't had any issues, and it just separates really easy. That's a good thing, because a lot of these people damage the split line between the transmission and the engine. Horrible. Can you pull the cherry picker back? Come on. There we go. Hold on. Up. You notice Subaru knew that these engines would come in and out. So they designed it to be removed without taking the hoods off. So go ahead and slide it back. All right. As you can see, she's out. So with that being said, let's rotate this around so you guys can see. Let's see what I see as far as catastrophic failure. What do you think? Let's see what we see, huh? Get some light on this thing. So where's your impact at, Dad?
Down the drawer, I think.
Down here?
I think so.
I don't know if this one will have any more oomph than that one. Just a little bit. Trying to fight it. Jeez, I got it. I bent the chair, but I got it. amazing.
It's under warranty.
The chair's under warranty. I bent the chair, but I got the crank bolt out. Yeah,
That's how it works.
the crank bolt was quite in there. Again, this is not a crank bolt that should be that tight.
I got injured, so I'm gonna have to get a minute back out here.
Uh-oh. Crank bolt out. Alright, let's see what we see here. Okay. Get this back up in our teeth so we can see it. Go ahead and pull our balancer off. Now that we've got our balancer off, pull our timing cover perimeter bolts. As you can see, it is a brand new Subaru belt from Subaru. Still has the marks on it. There's the timing marks. Has 8,000 miles on it. How does a brand new Subaru belt snap just like that? It says Subaru right on it.
Yeah.
What we're going to do now is we're going to put we need to do with this belt being broke, we didn't have a chance to see the timing marks with the timing cover on. Before we rotate any of the cam gears and stuff, that what we want to do is, in any Subaru situation that you're doing anything on these engines, is what you want to do is it's called parking the engine. Okay? And what you want to do is put your crank bolt back in it. Okay, and what you want to do is you want to bring all 4 pistons to the middle of the engine, because these are a interference engine, which means the valves and the piston sometimes utilize the same real estate. So if you jump time in these, break a timing belt, 9 times out of 10 it will bend valves. I've had one customer that when she broke a timing belt, it must have broke at the most opportune time, that when it broke, not one valve was touched. Could not believe it. I told her to go buy a lottery ticket. So what we're going to do is we're going to rotate our crank, and you don't want to do this very quickly because you don't want to have a piston hit a valve that's still sticking out, because we haven't parked the cams yet. Okay? So we just want to pull up on this, and if it moves freely without any tension, okay, we already know we have no compression because we have bent valves. So what we're going to do is rotate this until it's on timing mark, as we get stuff everywhere. Okay? If you look here, there's a timing mark here and a timing mark here on your oil pump. And we got coolant everywhere. Now that your short block is parked. Now we got to park the cams. The reason why you don't park the cams first and then the short block is when you're doing your cams, if the pistons are out, you won't be able to feel the pressure, because when you're moving the cams, this is more of a leverage, so you have a lot more force that can push the valves against the top of the pistons, and you won't feel the resistance as much, so you're more opportune to bend the valves. So I like to park the short block because I can get the pistons away from the cams. I get them away, I don't have any worries about the valves getting hit. And we don't have a lot of leverage over here because it's a kind of like a one-to-one type thing. So you just barely little pressure, you feel it kind of come to a dead stop.
No, he hasn't found out what's happening yet.
So what we're going to do next is we're going to park the cams. On the passenger side, you have timing marks right here that will line up with the split line on the head. So this one is now parked. See how it's in neutral? You can move it. That means all the valves are up against the cylinder head, none of them are sticking out. On the driver's side, right?
Yeah, we got the engine out. It's up on the,
this one is already parked because it's already free. And you know that because it will be 180 degrees out from the passenger side. Okay? Normally when these are put together and there's no broken timing belt, this upper one will be at the 12 o'clock position, and it will be under spring tension on one of the cam lobes.
Okay.
So when you park it, you want to let this rotate slowly to the 6 o'clock position, which puts this in all 16 of your valves throughout the engine will all be up against the cylinder head, and none of them will be protruding into the cylinders themselves. So this is now parked, and this is now parked. All right, I got the engine on the engine stand, and we're gonna pull these heads off and see how bad the carnage really is. I already pre-broke the torque with a breaker bar to get these off. So these bolts are specific to the holes they come out of, so you want to make sure they go back in the same holes that they come out of. Go ahead and pull this head off. And there we go, we have one head taken off, and let's inspect what we got. So, according to this, as you can tell right here, intake valves didn't hit on either one. No exhaust witness marks. But if you look right there, there is a witness mark for what is this, number 3 exhaust valves, both witness marked on the piston head. I can't tell if you can see that or not, but they are witness marked. So that means if we look at our heads, you'll see they are witness marked as well, right there. Go ahead and remove our head gaskets because we'll have to replace them anyway. I'll go ahead and get the other head off, and it's the same thing. Just get the other head off and then clear off this table, and we'll start working on heads. I'll see you in a bit. Go ahead and remove our head gaskets because we'll have to replace them anyway. All right. Upon removal of these heads, we're going to do the inspection, the cleaning, and find out exactly what we need to get done on these heads. I got all new cam seals. We're gonna remove the cam, remove all the rocker arm assemblies, the ABLS stuff. Do further inspection to see if there's any damage on these heads, and remove the solenoids and stuff like that, and make sure there's no metal in them, just in case there's any issues anywhere. So let's get started. One thing we're going to do before we remove all this stuff is, if I had a screwdriver. So on your intake valves you have an AVLS, which is the cam actuating system that opens up an additional intake valve at higher RPMs, and then at low RPMs it only runs off of one intake valve per. So what we have to do is we have to unload the AVCS or AVLS side. There's one. There's two. And what that does is it gets the tension off of the intake valves for the AVLS, for one intake per cylinder. If you notice, these heads come with 3 black bolts and one gold bolt. Make sure the gold bolt goes back in the same hole because it will block an oil passage. You'll see how it has one short bolt. Can you see that? Yeah. Alright, now that we got the rocker assemblies out of the way, we could start taking out. There is a series of perimeter bolts all the way around this. Now that the rocker arm assemblies are out of the way, I've already removed there's 6 large Torx on the perimeter bolts, and those are put away. There's 10 small 10mm and hex head bolts that have to be removed. And then you have to break the seal on this, which I've already done. Then on a pin, you got to be careful when prying on this because you don't want to gouge the mating surfaces. There are areas, provisions for screwdrivers to go into on either side. Just make sure you utilize those holes. There we go. That's your cam retainer plate that comes off. Your cam shaft comes out. Obviously I've already removed the front and the rear cam seals, and we're gonna go through and reseal this head. I will show you on the next head. I've already done I've already replaced all the valves, and I've already cleaned the surfaces, and I've already lapped all these valves in. I'll show you on the next head. I'm just trying to expedite putting this engine back together. What we're going to do now is we're going to clean the front and rear cam seal valleys. Make sure those are nice and clean because we will have to make sure or ensure that they don't leak. Same thing goes for our perimeter for our cam retainer, and we will be using assembly lube and stuff like that. So we want to get all this area nice and clean. I've already scraped it. You don't want to see me scraping stuff for 30 minutes, but I've already scraped all this clean, got all the RTV off of it as much as I can. On the next head, we'll go through step by step of everything that I did. Getting all these areas clean. I've already removed all the valves in this head and put all new valve seals, and did a spring check on each one of these springs.
I'm just looking.
My cousin happened to stop by, and he is wanting to learn Subaru stuff, so we will school him up. So, did you need something?
No.
Okay.
I just wanted to look.
So now that your cam mains are nice and clean, both front and rear cam seals have been removed and clean, the valleys are clean, your perimeter is clean, you've got to do the same thing to our cam retainer plate. This has got to be nice and clean. We're going to use a high temp gray. That's what Subaru recommends, is the high temp gray for resealing this. These are Subaru uses a lot of RTV as a sealing surface because a lot of their mating surfaces are machine mated surfaces, and they don't require gaskets, so that's what we're going to do on this one. So, like I said, I'm going to clean this cam retainer plate up, and I'll be right back. You don't want to sit here and watch me clean stuff up. I'll come back with a nice clean cam retainer plate. Alright, I got the cam plate all nice and clean. We're going to go ahead and gray RTV it. So if you look, just the perimeter, but you want to put it on the inside perimeter of that all the way around, and you'll see that you want to keep it away from any oil galleys or passageways. We're going to put some assembly lube on this. Then we're going to go ahead and flip this over onto it. All the way down. Okay. Go ahead and get our perimeter bolts. They're already all cleaned up and ready to go. Well, that ended abruptly. Sorry about that. We had technical difficulties. We ended up finishing that passenger side head up. Got the cam seals in it, got the rocker arm assemblies back on. We did adjust the AVLS, and we got it back on the engine and valve covers and everything else that goes along with it. Sorry we had to do that, but we are under a time schedule for that car to be completed. So we will get the driver's side head off in the next episode. If you like these how-to videos, please like, subscribe, share with a friend, comment below, and let us know. We will have a variety of different types of builds on this channel. We have LS swaps, we have hot rod trucks, we have fabrication. We'll have a lot more Subarus. And like always, this is Dan from R&R Garage. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.